Good evening, everyone. My name is Stephen Root. I'm an alcoholic.
Stephen.
God-given sobriety date is January 7th of 2008, and recently celebrated a 17-year anniversary. And I assure you, and if you ask my sponsor, he'll tell you I had very little to do with that. That's for sure. But what a cool thing. You know, I think tonight we're in a room full of enthusiasts, right? I mean, you guys are enthusiastic about this program. Who else drives halfway across town to a new meeting? Never been here before, right? I'm not worried about the people in this room, right? I'm a little concerned about the people who aren't in this room, right? Because we know Alcoholics Anonymous, maybe if you guys are like me, this wasn't really the last house on the block. This wasn't a place where I was going to come and try and figure out how to drink like a normal person. To me, this was life or death. I got here January 7th of 2008, and everything I owned fit in an HEB plastic bag, and there wasn't a person on the world who would want anything to do with me, wouldn't take a phone call, and I abandoned my children, and I had drank my family out of my life, and I was checking into this treatment center, same treatment center actually for the second time in under a year, and so it's never lost on me what a miracle it is that we're all in this room tonight, right, on a Thursday night, and just a miracle. And sometimes when I get up here, I actually look out in the crowd and I see seats, and I see faces of my friends, and they all they quit drinking without coming to Alcoholics Anonymous. Like my friend Brad Wilberger, he ran as fast as he could in front of a highway full of cars and was hit and killed, and he took his last drink that night. Or my friend Jason McKeag, who checked himself out of a treatment center and committed suicide the next couple of days. And so when I look out into this room, I see that y'all are here in the place of people who could not or would not see this way of life. And so I know it's a real big deal. And it's an honor to be here. There's guys I sponsor in this room. Did you hear DM get up here and do his thing? And I mean, God is just amazing, right? Who would take a guy like this who lived in a refrigerator box, who was blacking out, waking up with freight trains coming over him, and take him and give these guys, permission to ask me to be their sponsor? It's a really big deal. And I'm really simply just up here as a recipient of some really good sponsorship. And that's probably one of the only reasons that I'm able to stand up here with a suit, jacket, and tie on. I was taught Alcoholics Anonymous is a sacred place. And when you get up and you tell your story, you put a suit, jacket, and tie on, because this podium represents people who have come before us, who paid a really high price for some of these hugs and handshakes that we've given each other tonight. So I'm honored to be here. I should mention that my home group is Primary Purpose Group, of which many members I see are here tonight. We, of course, meet Tuesday night, 7:30. If you haven't been, we would love to see you. Come study the book with us. I have a sponsor, and my sponsor actually sponsors other men in this room tonight. His name is Chad Payne, and his home group is the Wednesday night Primary Purpose Group online. Maybe some of y'all have attended, but if you would like to attend, see me after the meeting. I've heard it's a really cool meeting. I've been on it a few times, people from all over the world. So it's a pretty in-depth way of studying the book. And I should plug my own meeting, shamelessly. I'm normally at a Thursday night meeting that I started myself, or I felt like God had called me to start. It's called the Main Object Group, and it's up in North Austin. We meet at 8001 North Mesa Drive, and it's a step study. I got the idea from something I read that Bill Wilson had said. Bill Wilson, one of my heroes, of course, one of the heroes to many people in the crowd. He said, the sole purpose of an AA group is to practice and teach the 12 steps, amongst many other things. And so that's what we try and do. We try to get together every week and talk about our experience with the steps and pull people in with a vision of what your life can look like if you take the clear-cut, precise instructions out of that book, even if you don't think it's going to work for you, even if you think that, you might have a better idea. What I can tell you, if your experience is anything like mine, is that if we don't convince you that this is an easier, softer way, then King Alcohol will convince you. And if you make it back here, we're going to be here. And like the guys who told me when I got back, is they said, hey, guess what, man? We're going to give you a same copy of that $8 book we gave you 9 years ago. Same copy, really. Not much has changed. So, I also spend a great deal of time with the guys that I have the privilege of sponsoring. We go into a treatment center every week. And we stay on the front lines. And I was told by a man who I came to love and respect, and who taught me a great many things in life, much more than just working the steps, a man named Charlie Parker, who taught me how to stay on the front line and be engaged with the people who are trying to come back in, maybe who've never even seen a copy of the book. And one of the things we used to talk about is sometimes we might be the only copy of the big book anyone ever sees. And so, we go into that treatment center and we put our hands out. We walk around that room and we shake everyone's hand and we tell them we're glad you're here. And hey, we brought books in, by the way. And it's just such a blessing to be able to stand shoulder to shoulder with a bunch of guys and gals who carry a really strong message out of the big book. It's a message of hope. And we try and pull people in with a vision of what it would look like to recover. Because like Matthew said, this is about a personal relationship with God found as a result of taking actions that are pretty clear-cut once you get into it, right? It's a simple program. Bill said it's simple. It's not easy. And I think that everyone can attest, we're all trying to pay the price, which is destruction and self-centeredness. So turns out if they just offered me sobriety when I got here, that'd be a cruel joke, man. I'd been sober for many, many years. And to me, it was that I couldn't be comfortable in my own skin. And once I got sober, I couldn't stop starting again. I never could find a real reason to stay stopped on my own power. I never could come up with another reason not to, my first drink at the age of 9 in the basement of my parents' home in Littleton, Colorado, it was like a spiritual experience, much like the book talks about on page 567. I had some, or more so what Carl Jung described that Roland Hazard had. It was like ideas, emotions, and attitudes which I had, which were the guiding forces of my life before I took that first drink, were suddenly cast to one side when I took that first drink of alcohol. And it was like all the pressure and anxiety and fear and tension that I lived in as a kid. I don't know if you guys were like me. I was always in trouble. Right? I was the kid who was always in timeout. I was always getting the phone call from the parents or the principals, and it was always like, it was very clear to my parents that, if you could just be like the guys across the street, man. They seem to follow all the rules and look at their haircuts and their sweet little, and I was the guy that was going down to the creek and bringing home snakes home. It's like, my parents didn't get it. And, but that kind of fear and that tension and anxiety that I lived in as a little kid, I remember just very clearly that tension just fell right off of me. And I took those big pulls off that bottle of sangria wine, and that warm feeling hit my stomach, and then it kind of rose to my head. And then the rest is described to me by my friend because I don't remember. But it was like 1 minute I was going to fight you. And then the next minute, the funniest thing you said just came out of your mouth, and I'd never heard anything funnier. And then I wanted to hug you because I'm so sorry I tried to hurt you, man. And then we were running around, and then it was like this for like 45 minutes, and then I crawled under the stairs and just passed out. And that pretty much kind of describes my drinking, really, if you just want to put a few things on it. That's pretty much going to sum it up. But I know looking back on it, what really happened, and it takes some time, I think, when you get a chance to sit down and really kind of look back at your drinking experience. And this is the truth for me. It's that I formed a secret with myself that day. I did not feel okay in my skin unless I was getting loaded. And I never turned down a chance to get loaded from that day on. I never said, no, I really shouldn't. It's my mom's birthday. Or I really should be there for my family. My grandfather just died. I really shouldn't get loaded. Or later it became, I really shouldn't get loaded. I need to go pick my daughter up from daycare. Those things never uttered out of my mouth because, you see, alcohol was my solution. It was my solution to a life which I believed was supposed to be lived on my own terms. And my whole life was spent trying to get everyone to do everything I wanted them to do, which kind of lines up with how I was always getting in trouble because I had a version of life that went a little something different than what you thought. But I spent most of my time trying to be a chameleon as a kid. I don't know if you guys can identify this, but I was the kind of kid who could fit in any group, right? If the kids were listening to heavy metal, I was all about heavy metal. And if it was everyone was skateboarding, I was all about skateboarding. And it was just like I'd bounce around. And funnily enough, I became an actor. I wasn't really good at sports or anything good like organized. But if you gave me a script and put me on the stage and told me to go out and act in front of people, I was all about that. And as you get into the truth of what it is that we really suffer from, the root of our problem, you find 60 through 63, that's precisely what it was that I was all about, which is just running the show on my own terms. And so maybe many of you can relate to this. It's when I first start drinking, it's nothing but fun. It's magic, right? It's the 90s, and we're going to big, huge music festivals, and right, the spirit of everyone is getting along, and oh man, it's just alcohol is magic, and it's at the center of my life, and there's very few consequences. And then all of a sudden I get to this imaginary place where it's kind of like almost everything is a consequence. But I lead this double life. And we look at this truth when we get to the fifth step. When we're looking at this alcoholic that's like me, I lead a double life. To the outer world, I present my stage character. And so, to my credit, very much so, I seem to be able to pull a lot of these really crazy stunts off. And many people who were really trying to help me never could get a chance at it. Because I could always explain this away. And so, maybe like many of you, I was in the office of psychiatrists, and I was in the office of psychologists, and I was talking to experts, and they were always trying to say, well, Stephen, it seems that, we got a little report about some really crazy behavior. It's like that. And so they were really trying, looking back on it, what they were trying to do is trying to help me. They were trying to relate. And we learned the process of identification is so important in Alcoholics Anonymous. In fact, it's one of the key factors of what it is that keeps us here, that gets us a seat here. When we finally sit down in front of someone else and we learn that we're speaking the same language. And we learn about the identification that's so important in sponsorship too, where it's like the person that sits across from us and having the same difficulty. And what was happening to me as a young kid or as a teenager is I was talking to people who were not having the same difficulties I was having. They had a lot of clinical knowledge and they had a lot of behavioral modification, and they were offering me very clear-cut solutions to people who didn't suffer from alcoholism. You see, you come at me with the theory like you're going to have to, straighten up your life and put down drinking. And you just put a line in front of you and I. You see, and that, we're not crossing that line. The conversation is over. Because, see, alcohol is solving all of my problems. And when you start telling me about the fact that I might have to quit drinking, you're talking a different language. It's like Mandarin. I'm not even hearing you anymore. I'm shutting you down. And so by the time I get to my first treatment center at the age of 22, I was broke. I was having experiences like I'd start drinking on a Tuesday and I'd come to and it'd be a Friday. And I'd wake up and I got a Burger King crown and a Speedo on. And I started drinking in Texas and I'm in Mexico. And everyone's speaking a different language. And I'm like, what the hell? It's like, how the fuck am I going to get back to where I started from? Trying to cross the border with a Speedo and a Burger Crown King, it's a challenge. So these types of things were happening over and over again. And so, by the time I was 22, it's like alcohol had ceased to be a luxury. And I don't know about you guys, but as the years went on, you see the amount I began to drink didn't really have the same effect on me. It started off with a couple of shots, but now it's me and my buddy, and we're polishing off a gallon of Tanqueray or a gallon of Old Crow whiskey, and it's barely getting me that effect, and I'm going straight into the blackout zone. And then it's kind of like I'm living on a dirty floor in a, burnout apartment in Anchorage, Alaska, with a bunch of guys who their whole way of life was like, we have an eye on something that you own, and if you can stop us from taking it, go ahead, but if you can't, it's ours. And we're doing this with semi-automatic rifles, and we're starting to, and it kind of seems like at 22, like this is just the way things are going to go for me. And now I've kind of drank all my friends out of my life, and I'm living this whole different, like the alcoholic life becomes a normal one when Dr. Silkworth starts to describe to us what begins to happen, is that I wasn't seeking ease and comfort from the drink. I was seeking oblivion. And so when I check into my first treatment center at the age of 22, thank God, and I have to steal a line from the man who started the meeting, a guy named Bob D in Las Vegas. He talks about sponsorships, the lineage of sponsorship being appointed to you by divine appointment. And I look back and I see my first sponsor when I was 22 years old was literally, God must have just hand-delivered this guy to me because he was exactly the guy I needed at that time in my life. He was a guy that wasn't taking any bull. He wasn't listening to my crazy 22-year-old stories. He was sitting me down in this treatment center and he was saying, Stephen, time out, bud. Okay, we've heard enough of this. Why don't you take a breath, man, and listen to what it is that we're saying? Because we're the guys who have been sitting in that chair that you're sitting in 4 or 5 times. You see, we were married 3 times. You see, we had a couple businesses that we burned to the ground. You see, our children, now we barely get to see them because of what alcohol has done. And as a result of working the steps out of this book with the sponsor who's had an awakening as a result of these steps, see, we've recreated our lives. And we're now doing new businesses, and we're now having new relationships with new things, and they're just starting to pull me in with a vision of what life could look like if I was to take this clear-cut, steps out of the book. And I was like, it sounded like something I was willing to do, because when I kind of took a look at I don't know about you guys, but I wasn't a psychopath. I saw what my drinking was doing to my family. I saw the pain and the suffering that they were going through. And I knew as weeks and months went on and they would get a phone call from someone as a missing person, or they would get a phone call that my car had been abandoned somewhere. And I knew that that was psychological and mental torture on my parents. I wasn't a psychopath. My parents raised me in a good home. I knew the difference between right and wrong. It's just that my alcoholic life is that I would say one thing I was never going to do, and then I would do that thing, and then there would be another line I'd say I'd never cross, and I'd cross that line. And so I'm sitting in the treatment center, and it's all kind of coming real fast. And they said, man, this treatment center is a great place for you to get sober. But if you want to stay sober, if you want to have a life outside of this treatment center, you're going to need to take the steps out of this book. And so we began this process. And man, what an amazing journey it was. Really, I went through the steps pretty rapidly, and I had a spiritual awakening. Exactly what the book talked about, an entire psychic change. I felt like I had been rocked. I mean, I wrote like a 47-page 4-step. Anyone ever write one that thick? It was like a mini book about yourself, and you're like really proud, and your sponsor's like, wait till we get to the fourth column, bud. I think you're gonna be as stoked until we get over there, right? So we did that 5th step, and you just feel like pounds and tons are coming off your shoulders, and you're walking out of there lighter. And physically, I felt a little rocked and sick, and I woke up the next day, and I could just felt something inwardly. I was reorganized, right? Like Bill talked about when he met Ebby. It's like I felt like my roots had grasped a new soil. I felt like a new man. And so we started to go back into this treatment center, and they started to tell me, man, if you want to keep what you have, you got to give it away. And so I'm sitting in there, and we're carrying the message, and then I got this bright idea that all my buddies that I'd gone to high school with, because I kind of moved around a lot as a kid, we're in Austin, Texas. And I don't know about you guys, but my first job coming out of a treatment center, I got a job at the Galleria Mall, and I got a job as a security guard, which was hilarious, right? So I'm like showing up looking like I was going to invade Poland. I mean, I looked like some kind of security officer. I had a little whistle, and I'm like, boop, 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 with a little, S13, go ahead. Like just so crazy that I'm out there, ripping people off, and a couple months later, I'm stopping people from ripping people off. It's crazy what God will put in your life. And but I got this weird idea that I needed to move to Austin. I'd been going every weekend, and I met a guy in the rooms, and he was spiritually on a higher level, looking back on it now, and I see that God had sent him as a messenger to me. But sometimes it is that God has a message for you that you're just not ready to hear. God's got a message for you that you're just not awake enough to hear. And looking back on it, I got a call from this man, and he said, Stephen, I've had a vision. I've had this intense, really powerful dream that if you move to Austin, something insanely terrible is going to happen. I just beg of you, I plead with you, please do not go to Austin. And I'm listening to him all the under the phone, and I'm going like, man, you don't understand. I put in a 2 weeks notice at work, and I haven't renewed my lease, and I'm kind of halfway there, and I'm really excited. And he's like, I beg of you, man, please don't go. And I'm just thinking, this dude's a little off. He's a little crazy. He's doing the Course in Miracles. He's reading Carlos Castaneda. He's reading outside literature. So this dude doesn't know what he's talking about. You know what I mean? So I'm like, thanks, dude. Okay, cool. Yep. Got to go. And I moved to Austin, and I had gone ahead of time and gotten involved in a group here that still stands to this day, and gotten a sponsor, and started making meetings. And the standard of AA was a little different for me at the time when I got to Austin. It was kind of like meeting makers make it. Make a meeting if your butt's going to fall off. If you want to drink, make a meeting. These kinds of things. And so you start to hear them in the rooms of AA, and it becomes AA. And so I kind of walked away from that disciplined program of action that was about carrying the message, and I kind of walked into the rooms, and my spirit was called to this very easier, softer way of AA. I mean, who wouldn't want to go to meetings and drink coffee and hit on the girls and tell war stories? And so I'm doing that, and in October of 1998, alcohol was not involved, and I caused an accident that took the life of my best friend sober. And looking back on that conversation, God, you got to wonder what would have been if you would have been awake and aware to hear what God was trying to tell you. And I'm far enough removed from that accident to tell you that what happened after that was not as a result of the pain and suffering I brought to that family that didn't deserve it. That family forgave me for taking the life of their son. They really demonstrated to me what God can do when he's working in the hearts and lives of people who I barely knew. What happened to me was that I went back into the rooms of AA, and again, I was called to a very different standard of AA. I felt like to treat my alcoholism, what I needed to do was attend meetings. And I felt like as I attended meetings and got involved in the fellowship, they used to say, hey, Stephen, stay in the middle because you will fall off at the edge, So I got in the middle of the herd, and I got a job that didn't really demand too much of me. And, I didn't want to mess up with my staying up till 3 a.m. to fellowship. That was really clear to me. Is like, I got to be fellowshipping all the time. I got to be in a meeting. And what began to take shape that I didn't have the language for was that as a real alcoholic, see what happens when I put down alcohol and I have no spiritual solution and I'm not connected to a power that's greater than myself. And I'm not involved in prayer or meditation, and I'm not taking a regular inventory process, and I don't have a sponsor that I'm being accountable to, what begins to unravel my life is what we call the spiritual malady or untreated alcoholism. And so for a real alcoholic, life doesn't get better because I put down a drink. Life actually gets worse. Because I've been treating the symptoms of my spiritual malady by pouring alcohol on top of them. And once I poured enough alcohol on top of all the symptoms of my spiritual malady, which is my selfishness, my self-centeredness, my dishonesty, and my fear, you see, I don't experience any of that stuff when I'm loaded. But you get me sober, and all of a sudden I walk into an AA meeting, and I'm like, what are you looking at, bud? You got a problem? I know everyone in here is looking at me. What are you talking about? What's he talking about? I know exactly what you're thinking. And this selfish consciousness just begins to unravel, and my life starts to become this idea that, if I just make enough meetings, this will go away and I'll feel better. But it was relationship after relationship, and it was job after job, and it was place after place, and it was always your fault. And it was always, I can't believe these people would treat me this way. They want me to show up to this job on time? Don't they know I'm an important dude? I got stuff to do. I'll get here when I feel like it, guy. And my manager's going, you can't talk to me like that. And I'm going, I'll talk to you however I want. There's the door. And I'm like, good, you're going to rue the day you let me go. I've got this ego that tells me I'm right and you're wrong. And I'm dying to defend this thing. And so my emotional nature becomes angry and confrontational. But I can't, again, ignore what's going on around me. And I start to become a prey to misery and depression. And I get this feeling of uselessness. And so I try to attend more meetings, and I try to pour more fellowship on top of this untreated alcoholism. And spiritually, see, my spirit calls for freedom. But my ego digs in and defends and says, man, you can do this by just making meetings. And so at 9 years, with no spiritual solution, no real sponsorship, no service to other people, no prayer and meditation, you could have seen this coming. The people in this room knew that what was on the horizon for me right at the end of that was a drink. But you see, I'm sitting there with a guy on my knees doing a third step prayer in an old room at the Howard Johnson 35 and 183. And he's telling me, Stephen, unless you invite God into your life and you get real clear and conscious about this new basis of life that you need to be living, you're going to get drunk. And I just laughed at him. I've not had a drink in 9 years, dude. You know what you're talking about. I'm kind of a big deal around here. When I share it, people come up and thank me after I share it. I don't know about you. In less than a month of getting up at this podium, and I picked up this 9-year chip, and I remember I didn't even, have you ever gotten up in front of a room full of people in your mouth that, I like to, and I had nothing to say. And I sat my little butt back down, and a month later, I'm drinking, and my last drunk lasted 3 years. And it was real crazy how the book precisely describes this in More About Alcoholism when it talks about the first example of the real problem that we suffer from really is the mind of the alcoholic. You see, if what my biggest problem was that I needed to stop drinking, then what would happen was when I put down a drink, then I would never pick one up again. If physical sobriety was all we needed to do here, then the page would be 1 page long. It would just say, don't drink no matter what and go to meetings, and then that'd be it. But what happens is that my mind continually, from a disturbed consciousness, from a disturbed spirit, separated from the power, I'm going to always find a way, my mind is always going to find a way to tell me I can control and enjoy my drinking one more time. Man, one more time. But within 30 days of picking up that drink, I was out of my apartment. And within 30 days after that, I'm living in my car. And within 30 days after that, I'm out of my car, and now I'm living on the streets. And so I spent 2.5 years in and out of jail, in and out of treatment centers, and in and out of the rooms of Alcoholics Anonymous, playing the game and thinking that if I just attended meetings, I would recover from alcoholism. And the problem is there's a lot of people in here that still have that kind of message, and there's nothing wrong with that message if you're not a real alcoholic. If you're a real alcoholic, that message speaks to a person whose experience with alcohol doesn't really line up with what my experience is. January 7th of 2008, when I got back into this treatment center, again, God showed up, and by divine appointment, there's a man that used to come to this treatment center. And he drove this big white Hummer. And he had this gold Rolex on. And you see, the guys that had been in this treatment center, they knew what they were about to experience, but I didn't. And they got real excited, and they all wanted to talk to him, and they ran out to talk to him. And he was a big deal, and I was sitting there. I checked in early that morning at 4 o'clock, and then he came to speak to this treatment center. What he started to describe to me was something I'd kind of had a vague memory of, but I'd lost touch with long ago. I'd lost touch with my truth in step one long before I ever picked up a drink, and that's what I find to be the truth, is that if I lose connection with the truth I find in step one, which is the basis of why I do all of the work, subsequently then the truth that I see in step three, which is my life run on my power, can never be a success. And if I lose truth, if I lose consciousness and connection with those two things, I will, from that disturbed state, pick up a drink every time. And he started to describe step one to me like I had never heard it before. He started to say things like, Stephen, you really only have two problems with alcohol. One happens when you drink it, one happens when you don't. But other than that, you don't really have a problem with alcohol. He started to describe to me that I was powerless over the first drink, even though I had not been drinking. I was like, wait, what is he talking about? So the idea that if I'm going to try to stay sober on my own power, if I'm going to try to just come to this treatment center and learn enough about alcoholism, or if I'm going to try to find a reason, like I need my family back or I need my daughter back, and I'm going to put that in front of whether or not I drink again, then all those reasons are going to fail. See, my truth in step one is that I lost power, control, and choice. And that if I'm not going to get connected to a power that's greater than myself in step two, then I'm going to drink again no matter what. Step one tells me I'm drinking no matter what. It doesn't matter what I do, I'm going to get drunk again as an alcoholic. Man, I had never heard anyone talk like that. He started to describe to me this predicament that I was in, this vicious cycle that I would drink until I had to stop, until I had to start, until I had to stop. And this was repeated over and over again. Unless I could experience an entire cycle change, there was very little hope of my recovery. And then what he began to describe was that this life that he offered was for free. That I had already paid a really high price to come to this treatment center. But what he had to offer me was for free. That all I had to do was be open to take suggestion and follow direction, right? And do things that I normally would have talked myself out of. And so we started working this process. And this guy's name was Charlie Parker. And it's hard to give credence to someone that changed your life so much. You know, when you look back at what sponsorship really ends up being about, to me, sponsorship starts off with I want to emulate everything that my sponsor does because I want to be just like him. Because he has something that I want. So how could I get what he has? I've got to do what he's done, right? And he starts to tell you things like, if you want the experience that I've had in this program, you're going to need to do what I've done. You're going to need to let go of all your old ideas. And I'm like, oh my God, what would I be then? Well, let go of my old ideas. My whole life is based on an old idea. Everything I do is an old idea. And he said, man, the result's nil. Nothing until you let go absolutely. Alcohol's cunning, baffling, and powerful. So we start this process and we get into this third step. And for me, the third step was like, when I first did the steps, when I was 22 years old, it was like powerless over alcohol. Yep. Life unmanageable. Yeah, probably. I'm in a treatment center. I mean, it seems pretty unmanageable, right? Do you believe in God? Yeah. Let's get on our knees and do the third step prayer. Okay, so we get down. It's like, go up in that room, write the fourth step. Okay, cool. But see, Charlie was coming at us with this thing that I'd never really had. I'd never had an experience with the body of work in 60 through 63. I never looked at myself as an actor who wanted to run the whole show. I never thought that I was forever trying to arrange the lights and the ballet and the scenery and the rest of the players in my own way. And I never thought that I suffered under the delusion that I could wrestle satisfaction and happiness if I just managed everything well. But I looked back in my experience, much like I did in step one, I look back at all the different times in which I tried to control the outcome in alcohol. I had a wholly different idea. And I look back at all the times when I tried to control my life and how my life slowly unraveled. And everyone and everything was always in collision with me. And I started to think, man, there's something to this third step that I never really gave credence for. And he said, well, Stephen, I want you to get to this concept where it's like your problems have always been coming from you and they've never been coming at you. Man, that was a big shift for me. This idea that above everything, I had to be rid of the selfishness or it would kill me. And I remember Charlie said, what does above everything mean to you? And I'm like, I think it means above everything. He said, well, Stephen, there often seems no way of entirely getting rid of self without God's aid. And he said to me things like, Stephen, your life is only manageable if it's in God's hands. And in order to recover, Stephen, you're going to need to find a way to live on an entirely new basis. So when we got down on our knees and did that third step prayer in that treatment center, I felt the power of God and the presence of God come into me. And I swear to God, y'all, 2 days later, they voted me in as a leader of the nut house. Right? They literally were like, you're the star of the asylum, and we want you to be. Gave me a little crown, and next thing you know, I'm leading the nuts in the nut house, like One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest. I'm like Jack Nicholson. So, I have this experience, and I'm writing this fourth step, and I also had the experience of leaving my fourth step out, and my current girlfriend reading that fourth step. By the way, if you're new, don't do that. Maybe you didn't even need me to tell you that, but just don't. Just don't. Just put the thing up. But we go out and we're taking this fourth step from the position of, as far as I'd really ever gotten was the world and its people were quite wrong. I mean, you guys were screwing me. Every day I woke up, it was like, you sons of bitches aren't going to get me. I swear to God. And I would go out and I would try and just, if everything's a nail, then my only tool is a hammer. And I'm just hammering my way through life. And so the fourth step really became this idea that, man, these manifestations of self are what have defeated you. So it seemed to me that everything came back to the truth I found in step 3. The resentment, the dishonesty, the fear, the selfishness as it pertains to my sex conduct. All those things were just symptoms of my spiritual sickness and me trying to run the whole show on my own power. And so we got down to causes and conditions, and I started to see the truth in the fourth column made the second column a lie. Just like my grant sponsor, Mark Houston, used to talk about. Like if it's done correctly, when I resolutely look for my own mistakes, I see that I set the ball rolling every time. I can trace back every single resentment to an experience I had where I stepped on your toes. And you just had to retaliate. Every single time. No matter what. It always starts off with I get angry, I get indignant, you can't treat me this way, and then I go into self-pity, poor me. And all the while, I'm convinced that if you just did what I wanted you to do, everything would be great. So he started to say, now, Stephen, this is your course. You might want to realize that perhaps the people who have wronged you have been spiritually sick. And this was a whole new language for me, right? We started talking about this spiritual sickness. And if I wouldn't let go of these resentments, I'd be shut off from the sunlight of the Spirit, and the insanity of alcohol return, I'd drink again. So in order to get free, I had to get to the truth that I don't think anyone in 17 years has purposely harmed me. What I see is people harm me from a position of being spiritually asleep on their feet, sleepwalking through life, dreaming they're awake. And they harm me from a position of being unconscious of their behavior. But they're just trying to do the best they can every day in this life, just like me. And see, when I go to sleep on my feet, and I call up my sponsor, and I've got the case, right? I got the case built, and I'm calling him, and I'm like, all right, dude, here's what happened. And you know what she said? And then she said this. And then you know what she did? He's going like, right. Stephen. Made decisions based on self that later put you in a position to be harmed. Every time. Right? So we get to this idea that this world of the Spirit, for me, began to take place in the fifth step. I had done a lot of things out there when I was drinking that I wasn't really too proud of. There were things that I did in the 3 years I was out, coming in and out of jail and in and out of treatment and in and out of living in a refrigerator box and being homeless that I was not too proud of. And I sat down with my sponsor and I just got completely free of that stuff. And I believe what the book says to be true. I think that we're having some spiritual beliefs, but then we begin to have a spiritual experience. Because when I can sit down and look you straight in the eye and tell you everything that I've ever done without any hesitation, and I want to get free and I want to be clear, man, that's the beginning of the spiritual journey for me. And 6 and 7, maybe you guys have found this out. I know I have. My current sponsor reminds me of this all the time. It's a lifelong process. 6 and 7 being they say, oh, it's a one little paragraph in the book. Oh, well, it turns out that one little paragraph is your whole life. It turns out, was I willing to let God remove all these defects of character? Yes. But did I go right back to using them in a pinch or in a heated argument or in a place where I felt like someone had disrespected me or wronged me? Absolutely. So step 6 turns out to be me trying repeatedly with no reservations. To grow in the image of likeness of my Creator, man, that's a tall order. The goal is to seek perfect release for the bondage of self. Well, how do I do that? Well, it's got to be every day. It's got to be a complete and utter, do I want to continue to settle for comfort or do I want to build character? If you catch me on a bad day, I want to go to comfort, right? I don't want to grow. I want to sit back and justify my terrible behavior, and I want to act like it's you. I want to act like it's your problem. Even at 17 years, I'm still doing this, guys. It's like I fell asleep at 13 years of sobriety. And you see, the wreckage that I caused at 13 years of sobriety, it's hard to wrap your mind around, because when you look at the wreckage I caused the people I loved, and I'm coming into a treatment center after I burned my life to the ground with alcohol and other things. I should mention I spent a lot of times in other kingdoms with equally powerful kings, right? Traveling in the world of the realm of King Alcohol, I wandered into other realms. And so eventually, but it's real easy to see what the wreckage looks like at that point. But when you're 12 years sober and you're harming the people that you love and you care about the most from your behavior sober, it's a whole nother layer of discomfort and pain and shame and anguish. And, I didn't want to get honest about that. And looking back on it, we are so lucky that we get to build a fellowship of the Spirit. And y'all know what I'm talking about. There's the fellowship, and then there's the fellowship of the Spirit. These are people you have spiritual consent with. These are the people who you look in the eye and you know exactly that they need to tell you your truth or you're a dead man. They'd rather step on your feelings than stand on your grave. And these people come to your aid. And this person was my sponsor at the time. And he saw that I was sinking in the mire that is alcoholism, and he rendered first aid. He reached out and said, Stephen, you're not a guy that gets away with a half-measures program. Stephen, you're not a guy that can't write a nightly review. Stephen, you're not a guy that can't show up at the Tuesday night meeting, at the Thursday night meeting. What's going on with you, man? And luckily for me, that shame and the guilt of what happened at 13 years sober overtook me, and I was able to tell the truth and get honest and get free and get back into a place where I could start maybe making some of those amends, But let's talk a little bit about the 10th step, because for me, that's been the difference between going back to sleep and staying awake. That's for me really what's been taking place, is that this watch, ask, discuss, amend, and turn, this is a lifetime process, right? So do I want to come to the world of the Spirit with my cognitive mind, or do I want to come looking for a new spiritual experience with an awakened spirit? Because you can come to the table with either one. But the book seems to be telling me that if I want to grow in understanding and effectiveness, I need to be coming from an awakened spirit. If I want to stay awake and aware, I need to follow the directions in step 10. I need to have a regular conversation with my sponsor or someone I have spiritual consent with. I have to be honest. I have to tell on myself. I have to do a pretty good spot check inventory. Very easy at 17 years to get up here and play the recovered man who I do everything right, and I've got all these service commitments, and my life is just on. And it's not the truth. That's not the truth. That's not the truth. The truth is that the practice of 10 leads me into the step of 11th step. Now, I know that for 9 years I spent in this program, I never practiced the 11th step. So I never knew that the 11th step began at night. I didn't know anything about a nightly review. I didn't know anything about having a day in which I'm awakened to the way God shows up in my life, and I'm aware of what I do to harm people, and I'm willing to make amends, or I'm willing to forgive someone that harmed me. I didn't know anything about that life. So sitting down at the end of the day to write out a review about what I missed during the day seemed crazy to me. It seemed like extra credit. But when you go out and you see what it is that you didn't do, and you get asked when you come back in, Stephen, what are you willing to do this time you weren't willing to do before? To stay here. Step 11 was a pretty clear indication. Meditation is something that took me a little while to develop, but now I wake up every morning. I have some spiritual literature I read. I walk through those exercises like it's my job, and I spend 25 minutes with God. Our grand sponsor used to say, if God's the most important relationship in your life, how much time you spend with God? And you would have asked me when I had 9 years, and I would have been like, I don't know. I mean, I said grace before I ate dinner. And now I know that that's the most important time for me. I don't miss morning meditation, and I can't say I do a nightly review every night. I'm not going to sit here and say that. But I do it most nights, and I'm better off for it. Now, why do I do all that? And many of the people in this audience who sponsor know exactly why we do all this stuff. Many of the people in this audience know that the real fruits of what it is that we're doing here in Alcoholics Anonymous, the real reason we do all these inventories and all this spiritual discipline is so we can be of use to other people. That's the reason. If the root of my problem is selfish and self-centeredness, I'm not going to get over that by focusing on myself. If I come into the program of Alcoholics Anonymous and I make everything about me, I can tell you my experience shows that it won't be long before I'm drinking again. So when I'm given a purpose, when I'm given a message, when I'm told to be responsible, when step 12 becomes a responsibility, like Dr. Bob says, it's a sense of duty. It's a privilege, right? In so doing, I pay back the debt to the man who carried the message to me for free. I look back and I see how God worked so beautifully for me. My sponsor, Charlie Parker, 15 years he was my sponsor. He gave his last talk in public at the very treatment center that I met him in 15 years prior to that. And it was so special to me. I spent weeks trying to craft everything that I thought I needed to say to him. And we knew that he didn't have long for this world. We knew he was going to be shuffling off this mortal coil soon. And so I practiced this thing. And, I met him there. And he pulls up to the place. And he's, when he gets there, he's always he's modeling things for you right up until the end. And when he got out of the car, he just straight to the new guys. Hi, I'm Charlie Parker. Like they'd never met him, like they didn't know who he was. He was modeling things for him right up to the end. And I had this moment with him. We went and had dinner, and I pulled him aside, and I'm trying to tell him everything that I thought I was going to be able to say, but I didn't get any of it out, and I'm sitting there just crying. And he pulls me, my face close to him, and he looks at me in the face and he says, Stephen, God didn't bring the two of us together to help just one of us. He's just way more efficient than that. And so what I'm here to tell y'all tonight is that God didn't bring you here tonight to help just you. He's way more efficient than that. So if anything tonight you've heard that is a representation of the program that changes lives, that saves the lives of people who are hopeless and helpless, then bring this spirit out to your meeting. Bring this spirit back to your home group. Use the power that's available to you in the fellowship of the Spirit and go help someone. That's where the real payoff is, right? That's what it is we're here to do. Although I like speaking from the podium, I don't get up here to hear myself talk. I know that what Charlie brought to me was a vision that really began with what Bill saw in Towns Hospital so long ago, right? A vision that thousands of men and women dying of alcoholism, high and low, could be helped if they could just take a hold of this spiritual program of action, get into a personal relationship with a power that you understand, and then turn around and go help somebody else. And so if you're new tonight, I want to make you a promise. It's a promise that actually predates our fellowship. It's a promise that predates our book. It's a promise that Ebby Thatcher made to Bill Wilson in Towns Hospital. What Ebby told Bill was that if Bill took this course of action, that at the time wasn't even the 12 steps, but it literally became later that, he made Bill a promise: if you take this action that's outlined in this book, that you would have a new relationship with your Creator and have the elements of a way of life that would solve all your problems. And then he said, belief in the power of God, plus enough honesty, willingness, and humility to establish steps 1 through 9 and maintain steps 10 through 12 were the essential order of things. Now, this way of life is simple, but it is not easy. There's a price that have to be paid, and it's the destruction of self-centeredness. And I think everyone in this room on a daily basis is looking to get closer to getting that self destroyed, right? And getting more God and less Stephen. Because, right, if I'm showing up to help y'all, there's not much of a chance you're getting help. But if I'm letting God work through me to help you, then maybe, just maybe, something's going to change. So thank y'all so much for letting me speak. I appreciate y'all being here. And that's all I got.